We also saw that there was differing private sector capacity for service provision. Little point in wanting to contract out services if the private providers simply aren't there. But the government capacity to manage contracts is really critical. We have had in the UK some very high-profile failures of government capacity to manage contracts, whether that's security at the London Olympics, whether it's our train system, whatever. So that if a well-resourced, relatively well-resourced country like the UK has difficulties, even more so in a country with more limited capacity. And then one has to think about the environment that the contracting process works within. Are there functioning legal and banking systems? Are there procedures resistant to patronage or corruption so that tenders can be awarded fairly? And then also we know from the theory, the economic theory of contracts, that the nature of services contracted makes a big difference. If it's something like cleaning or security, it's much easier than if it's primary care or clinical services. Example of the benefits that studying in different countries can give you. Because if you can develop a framework like this, you can begin to think, okay, if a country is interested in contracting out, are the conditions necessary for success thereon? So my second issue is that of disciplinary boundaries. I think it's really important to be aware that the health system is a subject area, not a discipline on its own. Okay? I don't think the health systems research should be called a discipline. It's a subject area, it's an area we study, and a variety of disciplines have their own particular perspectives on it, valuable perspectives. I think one of the issues in health systems research is that the health domain is often dominated by biomedical sciences. And you tend to get people who have strong medical research capacity, who are interested in health services, who do research on health services, but don't necessarily recognize the benefits of other disciplines. So I think thinking through how to build the necessary links between disciplines to address the question of health systems is really important. But I wanted to note that this challenge of multidisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity is obviously much larger than that of health policy and systems research. And we have a problem with that in universities. Academic structures and careers tend to be discipline-based. Research funders are often split by disciplinary fields. Research funding system discourages innovation and risk-taking. I'm going to talk a bit later. There have been moves within the UK to address that, and we've had changes that is trying to encourage far more interdisciplinary research, because many of the problems we seek to tackle are really intractable and need different disciplines to work together. So, coming to the funders, one of the funders' solutions been in the UK to having greater disciplinary diversity. We have these joint funding panels where the panels come together, that the funders come together with their own panels, like the Health Systems Research ones. So our Medical Research Council, Economic Research Council, and then other funders. However, the UK has embarked much more ambitiously on bringing all its research councils together within UK research and innovation, precisely to try and tackle this problem of working across disciplines. It gives things like discipline hopping fellowship to train in another discipline. Funder calls may require multidisciplinary teams. So this morning I mentioned the Global Health Trials call that requires economists to be part of a bid. That's good. Puts us in a slightly more powerful position because our medical colleagues lead us in the bid. However, it needs enlightened funders. So fortunately in the UK, we have funders who do recognise the importance of disciplinary diversity. How we've sought to tackle this within the school to get more interdisciplinary responses. We have some departments that do mix their disciplines, particularly in priority And we also have school centres that are cross-cutting across all our three faculties, which bring together researchers in particular fields. So, for example, malaria, where we have about 180 researchers working on malaria, they come from all three of our faculties, and the school centre makes sure that they talk to each other. So, my third issue is the issue of types of research and audiences, and the importance of diversity in that. I think it's really important to recognise in health systems research that there is a range of types of research. At one end, there's what I might call more academic research, with a longer-term payoff, potentially more generalisable across countries. And at the extreme other end, there's very local operational research with an immediate payoff, and it may be highly context-specific. And I would argue there's value to that, all of that continuum. And partly why that's important is because there's a diversity of audiences that we need to address. From the global level, addressing the issues of the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals. There are national agendas we have to address. There are local agendas. But I would argue that researchers' agendas are also legitimate. In the area of health policy and systems research, there have been definitions which argue that the starting point is always the perspective of policymakers, and that health policy and systems research must be embedded within the policy-making process. I would rather argue that policymakers operate under considerable constraints. Certain topics may be impossible to address. Other topics may not just be high priority this year, but in 5 years' time, they may be really high priority. So I think researchers, because of their relative independence in some cases, their ability to look forward, have an important perspective themselves on what the research agenda should be. They shouldn't dominate it, but nor should their perspectives be ignored. So, the fourth issue I want to address is that of funding and funders. So, I think there's a huge value in having a diversity of funding and funders. I think we need a mix of commissioned and investigator-driven research, so allow investigators to choose their own topics as well as governments commissioning research. Commissioned research can respond directly to current policymakers' concerns, whereas, as I've said, investigator-driven can anticipate issues that aren't within policymakers' time horizons and may address politically unacceptable or currently low priority areas. We need to recognise that different funders have different motivations, and any good researcher knows how they have to write their proposal to match the motivation of the funder. Comment on it has 50-50 membership of the panel from high income and low middle income countries. Freddie was a member of that panel some years, and the call is open to low and middle income country PIs and projects with no high income country partner. So I think that's important for you to know, that you don't have to go with a UK collaborator. You may be able to share skills with them, but this particular scheme, the UK has been very keen to open its research funding much more broadly, so that it's not only for UK PIs. So next, finally, I want to address the critical issue of research capacity. We had the discussions this morning, where we spent a lot of time discussing the need for capacity development in economics and the challenges of training opportunities and so on. We have a situation reflected in this diagram where we have a huge number of high-income country researchers and research, a small volume of researchers and research in low and middle-income countries, and then people like myself, like Freddie, like Cara, like some of you, who work in that intersection. We may come from a high-income country, but our prime research interests are in low and middle-income countries. This has been a big issue within Health Systems Global in terms of whether these are two different constituencies or whether they should come together. And in line with my argument earlier about the benefits of diversity of health systems research, I think what the aspiration should be is this, where everyone works in the common area of health policy and systems research, and we share knowledge and information and training across countries. So to achieve this, there badly needs to be a much greater increased focus on capacity development within low and middle income countries. So some suggestions on what is needed in order to do that. There need to be a range of funding streams, and I would encourage all of you in Uganda to make the case for some domestic funding for health systems research, because I think until you get more of a local funding stream, you're going to be very dependent on the priorities of those from outside the country. Even if they try and work with you on addressing local topics, still you're vulnerable to what UK funders or US funders decide should be the focus. So I think having domestic funding streams is important as a supplement to international ones. I think it's critical that there be support for long-term partnerships in health policy and systems research. I mentioned earlier that our main research collaboration started in 1990, so has been going for nearly 30 years, and I think that's been absolutely critical in developing capacity, because you don't build capacity on 1 or 2 years. You need to build long-term partnerships with stable funding. And one of the particular problems in this area is the extent of project funding as opposed to program or longer-term funding. Because all of you who've managed a portfolio of short-term project funding know how difficult it is, and indeed how that sort of project funding can be detrimental to the building of capacity. Fellowship schemes are huge, and we discussed this morning some of the fellowship schemes that are available to you in Uganda to apply for, such as the Wellcome Trust Masters in Research Training, the MRC Africa Research Leaders Training, and so on. There's an increasing range of fellowships available, and they allow you to concentrate for a period of time on a particular issue. And then I think we shouldn't forget that we must ask for support to research and educational institutions. Funders like to concentrate on the individual, and yet the individual exists within an institution, and the issue of the strength of that institution, their ability to manage research grants, their ability to support careers, that's really crucial. So those are the points I wanted to make in general in relation to health policy and systems research. And so Cara is going to take over and talk specifically about health economics at the end of this. I can look at how to do that.
No, I think we need to duplicate
Separate part. Okay.
I think we're not duplicating screens anymore. Super. Well, that's an opportunity to follow you. It did make me smile when you were describing your own career progress and trajectory, because it reminded me how very similar mine is. So I also studied economics and development economics at the master's level. I was a fellow of the Overseas Development Institute, only I was in Swaziland instead of Malawi, but did a very similar job. And then Anne hired me first in 1990 to join the very first of those different knowledge programs. So we go back a long way and have really rather similar roles and similar interests over a long period of time. Anne also reminded us that health systems is a topic, not a discipline. And so I thought it might be useful just to kind of think again, what does it mean to be a discipline? Because I'm speaking very much as a health economist. And I think the way disciplines are usually described as having a coherent body of theory and method. So I think economics very much meets that definition of a discipline. And therefore it's worth thinking about what does the discipline of economics have to contribute to the topic of health systems and policy research. She also talked about the evolution over time. So how initially health systems research was very dominated by economists. It became very multidisciplinary, but I think there still is value in thinking what is the unique contribution that economics can make to the field. And so one place to start actually is to think about the building blocks, the WHO building blocks model of a health system. And I've colored in green the areas where I think there's a really clear set of questions that economics can help to answer. So if we think first about service delivery, well, a lot of questions about service delivery are about the production of services. What does it cost? How do you make them? If you think about a production function and how you combine staff time and supplies and drugs to produce this thing, which is a healthcare service. It allows us to ask questions about efficiency and about cost. But it can also allow us to ask questions about scale and scope. So what services can and should be produced together? And what happens to costs as you scale something up? So is it always the case that doing more is less expensive? Or is there some optimal scale at which to be delivering services? I think it also can allow us to bring another body of economics in, which is the economics of healthcare markets. And when we think about health service delivery, what are the roles of the private and public sectors, and what are their strengths and weaknesses? I think the health workforce questions also lend themselves very easily to health economics analysis. So we think about labor markets and how do we retain health workers and have them working in the places where they're most needed, but also how do we think about their motivation and their effort in producing health services. For medicines and vaccines and technologies, there's quite a wide field of looking at issues of pharmaceutical pricing, but I think it links well to issues of access, but also to the economics of innovation and R&D, and where do pharmaceutical companies put their efforts, what are the innovation, and then thinking about how you might intervene in those incentives, which tend to favor blockbuster products for markets of high income. So how do you change the incentives of pharma to be able to invent drugs and products that will be useful for lower income markets, or for diseases that are affecting a very small number of people, but people who are very vulnerable. The financing issue is probably the one where there are the most obvious, most automatic links to health economics. In fact, we often talk about health economics and financing as a distinct subfield. So questions about how do you raise money? Do you do that through insurance or through taxation? What are the challenges of user fees? Issues of financial protection. Those are all very naturally questions that health economics can help to ask. But I do think that as a field, we health economists don't draw enough on some of the broader tools of economics. And by here, I mean, we don't necessarily have a really good understanding of healthcare market competition, and not just the role of the private sector, but the industrial organization of those markets. So is there competition, or is there a monopoly? Where is their market power? And how can we understand new forms of organization, like chains and franchises and networks in changing the dynamics of those healthcare markets. Sometimes with some problems in terms of market power, but often with some advantages in terms of regulation. I think that those of us who work on health workforce issues don't look enough to the tools of labor economics, understanding that when we talk about for example, WHO ratios of healthcare workers to population, that those are about need, they're not about demand. But who is demanding those healthcare workers? That comes from a healthcare budget. And so understanding how much of that need you can actually meet through an existing budget is an important economic issue that has to do with the labor market and understanding who the payer is. I think we don't draw enough on our public economist, our fiscal economist friends to understand really the fiscal space for health and where does health sit in the broader ecosystem of public service and how can we make the case for greater public spending. I find very often that discussions around health insurance arrangements help where with very limited involvement in ministries of finance that would have lots to say about health insurance versus other forms of revenue mobilization for health. And I think increasingly we're seeing the opportunities of behavioral economics, thinking about what are the incentives that individuals face in making their decisions, but also what is the decision environment in which they're making those questions. So questions around behavior and particularly around issues of things like understanding consumption patterns and sugar-sweetened beverages and obesity. Those are really important questions that our health system is going to need to address. And bringing behavioral economics to understanding those decisions, I think, is really important. I think it's also important that we think about moving our field of research from what tend to be very descriptive questions, know what's happening questions, how bad things are questions, to why questions. So why is it this way? But also, what sort of interventions are available to help to change things? And what is the impact of those interventions? So bring the tools of impact evaluation to better understand what really works in terms of health systems improvements. My second point is really much more looking at the field of health economics, and it's kind of my own epiphany in thinking about where I fit into the field of economics. So I used to really think of health economists in two worlds. So there was those who did economic evaluation and cost effectiveness analysis, that was kind of them. And then there was those who worked on health systems. And that's kind of the me, the we and the us. So if you think about an intervention like bed nets, the way I thought about bed nets was you people over there can show that they work and that they're cost effective. And then I'll worry about how to deliver them on a large scale. So what are the questions around pricing and distribution, and should they go through the commercial sector, or should they be distributed in mass distribution free of charges? Those were the questions that I was interested in. And I suppose what I've really come to understand over the last few years is that these questions are really related, because you can't do an economic evaluation independent of a delivery system, right? The costs of something depend on how you deliver it. And so understanding something about economic evaluation and health systems is important to guide health system decision making. And I think one useful way that the field is moving here is to think about what are the health system constraints within which the delivery system is operating, and how do we integrate those constraints into our economic evaluation. So this is a complicated diagram, but it kind of shows how one might characterize constraints on the demand and supply sides, then be able to think about how you would relax those constraints and to bring that information into your economic evaluation so that you end up with real world, real life estimates of what the cost effectiveness of something is likely to be in a particular setting or context. My last point is really a bit of advertising. So we've recently, in the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, launched a Centre for Health Economics. We're called the Centre for Health Economics in London, or CHIL, of which I'm at the moment director. I'm hoping that I will find someone to help me with that soon. But I think what's exciting about CHIL is that it brings together 50 economists throughout the faculty. Most of them are in my faculty, the Faculty of Public Health and Policy, who work both on high-income settings and on low-income settings, as a way to very much bring together our methods, but also our applications to generate new and more insightful research. We've just sent out our first newsletter. You can get it at our website, so please do have a look at the website, sign up for the newsletter, and be part of our effort to strengthen partnerships and collaborations in different parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I can convince you to clap more. Lunch is coming. Thank you very much. And I don't know how to go about it, but this is very, very important. I know some people came in a little late. So at the risk of distorting, I'm just going to point out some of the highlights quickly and then go to the question. Because with BNM, I think the two have indicated to us that the starting point don't matter. Wherever you start, you can end up in health systems and policy. And I think that should be a positive message for all of us. I also think that there. The other thing is this is a multidisciplinary field. You can't work alone, you have to work with others. Increasingly working in consortia, and funders are also trying as much as possible to ensure that these are effective. The boundary issues are being talked about. What is it? Is it a discipline? Is it a debate? What actually defines it? Where do we cut this? In terms of understanding the field, I think that has been well understood. I think here the 2 points I wanted to pick up is the extremes of generalization. Every time the students come to me looking for guidance, they say, but I just want to understand what is, how can I generalize this? I said, this is not generalized. So now I think you know that there are two poles. One pole is where you can generalize the community and you can tell the world that this template will treat this to this extent. That is that extreme. The other extreme is when you deal with the issue where only a district or a hospital is actually where you can generalize your finding, and not beyond. And so there is comfort in that, I just wanted to emphasize. Another issue, of course, being aware of the agendas and the way these agendas shape the questions we ask and the partnership we form. And I like very much the idea of how do we ensure that there is domestic contribution to this, so they can also have some, what do you call it? Whoever pays calls the what? So generally we would like to have domestic funding so that local issues can also get well addressed. Also we talked about the need for partnerships. The more we can have longer partnerships with well funding that goes across time, the more we can build capacity. And I think I'm testament to that. That's how I've developed over the years. And of course, support to institutions, not support to individuals. Now, massively is beneficial school computers because the school computers is doing well. But if you see the institutional development in that case is enormous. IRBs now is in the US, you don't have to worry about that. But if IRBs to fund requires a lot of work. Of course, finance management unities and many others, those institutional aspects are key. And we've been told about those. We've been talked about, Kara has also mentioned about the contribution now of economics to this, which I think has been very clear, but just to emphasize, many times we will come to contribute where the efficacy studies have stopped. And I hope I can use this example, but my colleague, senior colleague, did the circumcision one in Raqqa, and I was approached to say, now you go and popularize it to the public. The ministry was even fearing to say, the big man has said this is confusing, don't that, so we can't do it. So Fred, you go and talk about it. So eventually we costed it, we popularized it, we wrote policy, we did impact assessment, we modeled the impact. So the research that happened after the efficacy is a lot to tell you that there is a partnership that is required for this to work. Otherwise, when the efficacy people stop, the systems people are not going to start. But you can think together from the start so that the seamless generation of knowledge. And the markets, how we market this, I'll tell you an interesting thing about circumcision. Whenever I would go to the radios and TV, they would say, "Doctor, where do I go? Which hospital do I go next?" And then I didn't know where to refer to them. Because all hospitals were like, "Who wants circumcision here? We have emergencies. We can't even manage them. The emergencies are already too much. And you bring circumcision?" So I tell them, go to the next health center, but first find out if they've started circumcision. But it was not satisfying us. So to tell you that there is a lot of efforts that go beyond, and many of these market supplies in their capacity. Can people afford? Can the providers be ready? There are behavioral issues around this, which almost top of the thing. We always worried that should we get a person to buy circumcision or to be chopped off wrongly? The program was done. So when we were launching the policy, the worst nightmare was somebody to show up and say, "I was cut off. My manhood is no longer there." Because that would have made the whole circumcision story. Even if it is one case, that is the business of health systems. Even one number, one case can actually be enough for impact. Although in statistical terms that doesn't count. But this time it counts. So with those few words, let me open this for discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the opportunity to engage and ask questions, clarification, or share experience. Yes, I don't know if the mic can come or you can shout.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to talk to the School of Public Health. I have a background in systematic reviews, and my question goes to Professor Anand. You mentioned the boundaries, disciplinary, audiences, geographical. Now, I know that WHO and many other organizations push for systematic reviews which gather so much information from so many disciplines. And I was wondering what you think about that, because in a systematic review, you end up with that aggregation of so much complex stuff, which you can't even apply within one country, let alone spread across the discipline, one audience. What do you think about that? Have we totally gone off? Or should we come back and just say, look, let's focus on who needs the evidence? Can we focus on getting them that evidence?
Yes, let me try.
Okay, the mic, go, let's collect the two, so I can just write the question down. Anyone that the mic is coming down and won't come back. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to lose the opportunity because the mic might sound. Right. My name is Abu from the justices side of things. I really appreciate the government involvement of the health systems is an area I'm supposed to visit. Because in a senior health system, we always use the WHO for getting applause. And the question is, there are other paradigms of looking at the national health system. And the question of other paradigms be a subject of health system research.
There was a hand
Thank you very much. My name is Fred from Pharmacy Department. Thank you very much for your presentation. Being a pharmacist, I was interested in hearing from Kara the role of pharmacoeconomics, especially low and middle income. I know it has a lot of value in countries that do a lot of innovation. What is pharmacoeconomics for low and income countries that do not do a lot of work in innovating and so on and so forth?
All right, there is a lady I want to get up there, and then we'll come down.
Thank you very much. My name is Roy Educate, biomedical engineer from the School of Biomedical Sciences. My question goes to Professor Ann Mills. You have spoken about health systems research in line with understanding how to implement Most of the successful interventions are encouraging international collaborations, but more in line with what the professor. My question is how these health systems research can be implemented in medical device design and implementation, because they're very in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we shall see whether this side has it.
Especially the workforce development, I see that some of these things can really work and be translated and help the economics of the in the civilized, Western world. So I feel that there is a danger of thinking that this is only for the third world or the global south, and this is not for the global south, by your geographical split. While I think it would be very useful to see how that same thing can be applied in the north. So I'm very concerned about that. Because from the epidemiology, we have a lot of studies that are conducted in our part of the world. But that tends to be extremely very relevant in terms of its applications up in the north. And therefore, we find that sort of trying to do, because one of the things that is trying to do, which I don't see much in health system, which goes back to Suzanne's point, doing what you call multi-site, multi-center studies in terms of your design of your trials or whatever evaluation you like to do. I think that will help to really create a sense of some of these issues being able to be generalizable.
Yeah, of course you can share questions.
That's an amazingly rich questions. The first question was about systematic reviews. Yes, I agree that systematic reviews can be a mixed blessing. I think it's absolutely crucial the setting of the question, because if you set a very broad question, you risk mixing all sorts of country contexts and so on, and it's easier to pull findings out than more qualitative ones. I think there's some developments in systematic reviews that are really important. There has been quite a lot of emphasis on how to use methods of systematic review for non-static or non-trial type evidence. So to use narrative reviews, for example, to have systems to not just take published papers, but also policy documents, for example. I think the thing that's important to me, I think there are two things that are really important related to systematic reviews. One is to remind everyone that knowing the literature is utterly critical first step to doing research. That in fact, the founder of the collaboration argued that it was unethical not to do a literature review before you start doing research. Because otherwise, you may be reinventing the wheel, you may be exposing patients to risks when that question has already been answered. So I think the first point about systematic review is that it reminds us of the importance of literature review and knowing your literature. The second important point is, I think, the systematic. I think you don't have to do a Cochrane-style review. We now have many different ways of doing systematic reviews. You can do scoping reviews. What matters is that you go about it in a systematic way, so that you can justify the boundaries of your review, how you handle the evidence, how you decide what to exclude, what to include. So I think I'm not very curious on the particular approach of any particular systematic review, but I do think we have to remember about the value of knowing the literature and of being systematic. So
second question was about the place of pharmacoeconomics and so on. Cara, I'll leave that for you. And was about bioengineering. Simplifying the nature of what you do, simplifying the device, maybe even not needing a doctor to apply, but rather a lay person can use a diagnostic. I think there are huge values. So I can't answer your question as how to get more biomedical engineers, but I certainly think we can make a strong case for them. And then, David, your question. I absolutely agree that there's learning in both directions, that industrial countries can learn hugely from what's going on in developing world. So, and I agree also with the value of multi-country studies and including all types of countries. So I didn't want to imply that all the benefits flow from learning about tiny countries, translating them to the global south. I think the learning is mutual. And I think you may have forgotten the question.
There was one question. Yeah, the anatomy, different paradigms for characterizing health system. Okay. So I'll start with that and I'll come back to the pharmacoeconomics question. I think there are lots of paradigms. I can think of at least 4. And they tend, what's the right paradigm? Every question. And so there are these sort of structural, functional things. There are models that look more at the relationships between building blocks rather than characterizing individual building blocks. There are frameworks that are focused more on what you can adjust to get the health system to respond, the so-called control knobs paradigm. I think one of the most recent paradigms is of health systems as complex dynamic systems. So less concerned with specific building blocks, but more appreciating the non-linear relational nature of health systems, where one thing will almost certainly lead to carry-on effects and feedbacks that can cause interventions to have quite unexpected and unpredicted responses. So I think there's lots of paradigms. The WHO building blocks are only one amongst those. And what the right model is really depends on what your question is. And that's actually a research question. So it's one which is a very active field of working within most of your colleagues. The following economics question, it doesn't seem to be much of it going on in developing countries. I think there certainly needs to be a lot more. So pharmacoeconomics is kind of a subset of economic evaluation having to do with the assessment of new drugs. And it usually involves comparing their costs and their effectiveness. And in some countries, the use of pharmacoeconomics is very institutionalized in health system decision making. So in Australia or the UK, for example, there's quite a rigorous system of assessing new products to see whether they offer better value for money than existing products, but therefore whether they can be included in national drug formularies and reimbursed through public payment systems. I think we see reverberation to that, the more general sort of priority setting literature, things like the Disease Control Priorities Project, things like the development of health technology assessment capacities in countries, through things like the National Decision Support Initiative. I think we need to think really hard about how to integrate that thinking into health system decision making, because as economists will always tell you, our needs and wants are infinite and our resources are limited, so you have to think very carefully about what we can afford to do. But I think it also is something where the capacity to do that in lower income settings is less, because there are fewer people who are trained in those skills. Thinking about then how much capacity can exist at a country level and how much can be used, drawn upon regionally, and thinking then in a systematic way an HTA study for every intervention in every place. So, in what circumstances is evidence for other settings relevant decision? So, really important questions.
Thank you very much. Let me look at this side. There any need for asking a question? This guy seems to be okay. Wonderful. I have 2 hands, and we'll take those and then try to wrap up.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Joseph Kagai, School of Public Health. And my question goes to I have been very much intrigued about this confluence between economic evaluation and health systems economics. I have really been thinking about all the economic evaluation we do in the context of clinical trials. You know, this is before all the thinking has been done into the delivery mechanisms of these interventions. In your opinion, would you say such evaluation should be delayed until the health system nuances have been actually worked out?
Thank you. There was 2 hands here. Please make the question short. We are ready.
Goes to all the room. It is very important that how do you the recommendations from the perspective that is economic intervention, what is it recommended, and the fact that some of the so they are able to make economic sense, what to overcome advances action. And thank you very much. The School of Public Health do a lot of research, produce evidence. We have a health policy advisory committee in the Ministry of Health. We even have a research technical working group. But what the ministry probably can flow into the health committee of Parliament. How can we help? Professor Fred, Professor Anna, probably would help us. What we want to do better. Thank you. Thank you.
There's a mic back. You can talk from the Parliament of UK way or close, and I'll talk on behalf of the committees here. I think this will be the last round. We are going to wrap up.
So back to the question of when to do the economic evaluation. I think that raises some really interesting challenges because you put a lot of resources into doing the economic evaluation, and then sometimes you find that the interventions didn't even work, and so you have the challenges of how you estimate the cost of something that's not effective. That's one particular problem. But I think you're also talking about the difference between a cost efficacy study and a cost effectiveness study. And you're right, sometimes it's worth thinking hard about what is the delivery system that you're going to cost. If you're costing a system that's very specific to the trial, that's something that would never happen in practice, then the costs of that system are very unlikely to be relevant to decision making in the future. So that raises, that does lead to some challenges that, what's the delivery system that you should and is it worth going into a lot of detail for a very research clinical delivery system, all the controls that are required for research? Or might they be better off to wait until something is actually being rolled out under more operational conditions? It's a good, not a very easy answer to it, but I consider this a challenge of doing economic evaluations too early, like it's not telling us anything about it.
So there's 2 questions. I'll pick on the first one. I think your question was about the fact that interventions have both benefits and risks or threats. And I think I don't think economic evaluation is necessarily very good at making sure that the risks are encompassed as well as the benefits, but there does need to be a trade-off in thinking about one needs to include both elements of risks and benefits. In terms of the comment from the Ministry of Health, yes, an absolutely critical question that all countries struggle with. There is an evidence base of literature on how governments can bridge the divide between them as users of research knowledge and the producers. There is various experiences of brokers that help to broker the relationship between governments and researchers. Governments may be quite proactive about commissioning research to help answer their questions. They may engage with the research community in various structured ways to develop research questions. They may commission both shorter and longer term research. So I agree it's a huge issue, but that there is some experience developing on how best to do it. Thank you.
Just reassure you, first to you, Mr. Tim Malete is our commissioner at the Ministry of Planning. Thank you so much for being able to join us. Let's welcome him because he's working policymaker and client. I think Untitled knows what we are trying to do, but this is a big area. And you are in a big college, we all don't engage in the same way, but your prayer has been heard. We will do more and more to see that we engage within those forums. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to free your hands and we give a big round of applause for Professor News, Professor Hansen. We are so blessed to have you today, and thank you so much for such a wonderful center. You can see the place is full, even the food can't be distributed. But in general, I let's give a big round of applause for all of you for coming. And continue to do so because this space is going to become more and more engaging. As you can see, we just started on some of these issues. We're going to try as much as possible to exploit both the relationship we are building around London School, but also the experts that are in the room, to start and discuss these issues, particularly for the young ones, to begin to choose and be confident that they can carve out a career in this area. So with that, God bless you and good afternoon.